Hello and welcome to the second episode of the Everybody Talks Some Movies podcast. I'm your host Cole Weinstein, and here today I'm joined by a good buddy of mine, Ty Rothermal. Ty, how you doing?
I'm good. How about yourself, Cole?
I'm doing great, and today we're going to talk about the 2008 superhero film, The Dark Knight, directed by Christopher Nolan. This movie is Ty's favorite of all time, and it's one I haven't seen for a few years but remember loving. I loved revisiting it, and I'm really excited to talk with Ty today, and we're about to get into a spoiler-filled, in-depth discussion of The Dark Knight. So, Ty, clearly you love this movie. It's your favorite film of all time. Tell me, what exactly do you love about it?
There's so much. In my eyes, this film is flawless. I recognize that there are little issues with it, but I can see past them. So if a film is so good that I can see past tiny little flaws, I will call that flawless, even though that is really contradictory. Heath Ledger's performance is my favorite of all time. He encapsulates everything I love about the character from the comics, but also adds new and unique aspects to it while not feeling out of place for the character. It also does a really great job of continuing the story of Bruce Wayne that was started in Batman Begins and highlights a lot of the challenges that comes with being Batman. One of the things about this movie, and I can't say this for any other comic book movie except maybe Logan now, is that if you remove Batman, this movie still works as a film. It doesn't use the comic book lore as a crutch, which is something very unique about The Dark Knight.
Yes.
This
Did you have something else you wanted to say?
Nope, no, you,
Okay.
no, it's all good.
Cool. Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to go back to obviously Heath Ledger's performance, which is there's a lot of great things about this movie, and on rewatch I really realized that. But first and foremost is Heath Ledger's performance as the Joker. Obviously, it's iconic. It's one that really everyone, comic book movie fan or not, has sort of acknowledged as a really great all-time performance. And at least for me watching it, I remembered how just unnerving his performance is, and really just how deep he dove into this character. Usually, I can admit a performance is great and I can love a performance, but I struggle to not see the actor. Very few times in a movie am I able to look at someone and go, that's not the actor, even if I love the performance. And I very rarely, I have to look really hard in a few scenes can see Heath Ledger, but otherwise, it's the Joker completely. And he just sinks his teeth in that performance. And honestly, he's an actor who I think's had a really underrated career. And it was obviously sad to hear him pass after this movie, devastating. And I would have loved to see what he could have done in a Batman sequel and just what he would have done in the future. Because with this performance, he proved to be a titan among actors. And his performance is just incredible. Do you have any scene in particular, Ty, that you really love where Heath Ledger sort of shows off his acting chops?
Yeah, the first scene where we see him unmask himself in the bank scene, I love that. It was a good intro. You really get a feel for the character, and then of course there's the interrogation scene, which is just incredible. The acting from Ledger himself, who just really he gets under your skin. He's just you just never know which direction his performance is going to go in, which is something I love about it. Christian Bale's great in that scene, Gary Oldman, and it's just so tense and it's directed beautifully and acted beautifully. And without Heath Ledger, that scene falls apart with any other actor.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things I really noticed about The Dark Knight is how many iconic lines there are, but how many great scenes encompass those lines that I don't think are talked about as much. The interrogation scene is talked about a lot, but what I don't see talked about enough from this movie is how that scene opens with Gary Oldman walking into a black room and all you can see is the Joker and him
Mhm.
clearly being scared out of his mind, and the Joker getting into his head. And I love their dialogue, and I love just this unnerving feeling that the Joker gives you. And then so there's something about that darkness that's really unnerving as well. But then he leaves, you turn on the light, and Batman's there, and that's when they really have their clash, and maybe the biggest clash of the entire movie, because the Joker really gets under his skin there. And it's one of those
Mhm.
scenes where you really start to see the skeleton of Batman and who Batman really is, and see him break. And there's one moment that I really love about that scene. It's Batman hits him, and he's Joker says something to the effect of, "You don't hit a prisoner in the head at first; they get all fuzzy." And he smacks him on the hand, and just with the most natural response ever, he goes, "Oh, better." Like it's just one of those little chuckle moments that's just so good, and it feels so natural, and it felt, maybe it wasn't, but it felt improvised to me. And even if it wasn't, it takes a great actor to make something scripted feel improvised. That's a great little moment in an incredible scene.
Yeah, I agree absolutely, and you're right. He really does get under Batman's skin in that scene, and not only that, he gets under your skin because something great about the film is that it makes you care about all the ancillary characters, and so you don't want Rachel to die. You want him to be able to save Rachel, and knowing how the Joker works, you're just on the edge of your seat. And the first time you see it, you're not sure how that scene's going to play out, and it's just fantastic writing, directing, all around the board. It's awesome. I love it. I can't get enough of it. Like I'll find myself going on YouTube and I'll just watch it sometimes because it's that good.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really is just that scene, and a lot of other scenes in the movie, just everyone at their best. Bale is really at his best. I know sometimes people have had issues with him as Batman, whether it's his voice, whether it's certain ways that he acts, but I don't really think anyone has an issue with Christian Bale's performance in that scene, and how vulnerable he is, really, as Batman and as Bruce Wayne. And just a great scene overall. I want to go back to that opening scene that you were talking about, because it's a really great way to capture the audience's attention. I think the opening of a movie is so important because at that point, like most things, humans make up their minds so fast whether or not they're going to buy into something. And with a movie can slowly get you into the world, and you can buy in. But with a great opening scene, you buy in immediately. And that's what that opening scene of The Dark Knight does. It's so well made, it's so well edited. There's this really great rhythm to it that almost feels like some like Aaron Sorkin dialogue. It's like so it's like snippy and quick, and it's just it gets into such a rhythm, and you as an audience member get into such a rhythm, and it makes you so interested in watching this incredibly choreographed, coordinated heist, which is awesome. And obviously the reveal that you were talking about, where Heath Ledger reveals himself to the audience, who backstory really didn't like his performance, or didn't think he was going to give off a good performance when they originally heard Heath Ledger was going to be cast. And in that moment, he sort of silenced all the critics. And it's just a great scene in general.
Yeah, it is. It's incredible. And just, it was, I believe it's the only or one of the only scenes in the movie filmed with IMAX cameras. And watching that on a big like projector, 55-inch TV, watching that just, oh, it's just so gorgeous to look at. And then you see all of the clowns pick each other off one by one, and then it eventually culminates in that great confrontation between the Joker and, oh, why am I forgetting the actor's name? He's the owner of the bank. They have that great confrontation. It's so cool, and I'm blanking on what the Joker says at that moment. Oh, it's whatever doesn't kill you simply makes you stranger. I love that line. It's so cool and it's so Joker, and it really sets the tone for the entire film.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just like sort of this total play on the saying, whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And it is such a Joker thing to say. It's it's really a great line, and uh great opening. Yeah, I think that the opening really sets the tone, and I think really showcases one of the sort of underrated things about this movie. sort of how it's put together, not only the editing, but I talked with Ryan about this on the Alien episode that we had last week, which if you haven't heard, you should go check out. Ryan and I go into depth on Alien, another great movie. But we talk about how dynamic the camera is and how that keeps the movie exciting. And that really contributes to both the pacing of Alien and to the pacing of The Dark Knight. And Nolan and his longtime collaborator, cinematographer Wally Pfister, are really on their A game here. The camera is always moving, whether it's panning or it's sliding, or even just in dialogue scenes, it's just zooming in ever so slightly. And not only does it always keep the audience on edge, but it keeps the shot refreshing and interesting and exciting. And I think that's really showcased in that opening scene, but throughout the rest of the movie. And while you may not notice it when you're watching it your first time, or if you're noticing it ever, it subconsciously makes the movie more exciting. And I really just love how this movie is shot.
Yeah, me too. There's not one shot in this movie that isn't breathtakingly gorgeous. Every shot is so different and unique from the standard that you would see in any other movie. Nolan always tries to go for the most interesting angle to pull the most emotion out of the audience and to help elevate the script and the performances. And Wally Pfister does such a great job. And it's been a while since he's worked with Nolan, and I don't think he ever gets the credit he deserves among people when talking about cinematography, because usually people focus on Roger Deakins, and it's like, look at Wally Pfister. He does such great work. Just look at The Dark Knight, look at Inception, look at Dark Knight Rises. He does incredible work.
Yeah, absolutely. Shockingly, the last movie that he was a cinematographer was The Dark Knight Rises. I know he directed the Johnny Depp movie Transcendence a while back, which I never saw, but apparently didn't get very good reviews. And I think he's either taken a break or people aren't giving him jobs for some reason. I don't know why, because the dude's a great cinematographer, and he's really what sort of helped to develop that Nolan aesthetic, because Nolan has such a unique look to his movies. There's certain directors, and really great directors, where you can look at a shot from their movie and really tell that it's them. I feel like I can do that with, say, a Wes Anderson, a Kubrick, a Nolan. And the reason why, Tarantino, absolutely. And the reason why I can for Nolan is because of that aesthetic that him and Wally Pfister really helped create together. Yeah, he does an incredible job in this movie, and really, as much as any actor, as much as any scene, as much as any set piece, really keeps this movie paced so well and keeps this movie so exciting. Him and Nolan did great work together in this movie and many other movies that we will hopefully talk about on the podcast. I want to talk about another scene that really stood out to me on this watch I had, and that's the scene where Harvey Dent says, "You either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain." And I think what isn't talked about as much is how great that scene surrounding that line is. Bruce comes in with, I believe, his ballerina girlfriend, trying to make Rachel jealous, and Rachel is sitting with Harvey, and they're trying to have a romantic dinner, and Bruce combines the tables together, one because he's jealous that Harvey's with Rachel because he loves her, and he's playing this off as this super suave Bruce Wayne character that he's put on. And they have this really interesting dialogue about what kind of a city has Gotham become that they let a bat fight crime, this vigilante. And Harvey's defending him and talking about how he wants people to stand up against justice. And it's such a great scene. It really reminds me of an Aaron Sorkin movie, because the dialogue is just so snappy and just so quick, and it's really well done. And it really, for a movie that I would say doesn't foreshadow as much as I would hope, and doesn't have as much as far as like real deep symbolism that you can find on a second viewing, this is a great scene that really does foreshadow what goes on later in the movie, and I think it's great.
Yeah, no, I agree absolutely. And one of the key aspects to that scene and that moment that you were talking about specifically is Aaron Eckhart as Harvey Dent. A lot of people sleep on his performance in this movie, but it is so well acted, and it's so crucial that that role is as well acted and as well executed as it was, because at the end of the day, Harvey Dent is one of the key players of this movie. And so the nuance that Aaron Eckhart brings to it really just helps take every scene that he's in to the next level, whether it's with Heath Ledger. They play well off of each other, or him and Christian Bale, or him and Maggie Gyllenhaal. He does a fantastic job. And that scene that you're talking about specifically is really well written, and like you said, like the snappy dialogue, it just feels natural. It never feels like, oh, somebody wrote this. It just feels like people talking. And that's a huge aspect of this movie. And that's the that can be said to just about every scene in the movie.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Aaron Eckhart in general is a really underrated actor who probably doesn't get as much work as he should. My favorite performance of his is in the film Thank You for Smoking, a movie I would highly recommend. Incredibly underrated. I don't feel like enough people talk about that movie. I hope to talk about it on the podcast one day. And he's great in this movie as well. I have a few issues with his character and sort of what he becomes later on, and they're minute because this is a really great movie. If you didn't know, I really do like this movie. But even the moments that I feel like are a little out of character for him, or how I feel like he sort of develops into Two Face a little bit faster and more sudden than I would have liked, he buys it and he goes for it. And it never feels like he is the one who is ever holding this character back. Every line of dialogue, he goes and gives 100% and really does make this character a really, really interesting character study. Yeah, he's great in this movie. And I think another thing that I really, really do appreciate about this movie is when you sort of think about it, a lot of comic book characters can be kind of ridiculous. And I think a lot of movies do sort of play a little bit of tongue in cheek that these are superheroes going around saving the world. But I love how Nolan and Eckhart really, and really everyone else in this movie, tries to make these characters so grounded. And a villain who has half of his face burned up and the other half is not, and he goes by Two Face. It's kind of a silly thing when you really think about it, but Aaron Eckhart makes it so honest and so genuine and really, really believable. And I think that's really commendable about his performance. Same thing with Christopher Nolan. Obviously, they made a guy running around dressed up as a bat chasing a clown an incredibly serious and dark movie that really has intense stakes.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the directing by Christopher Nolan, this is the movie that made me realize movies are more than just entertainment, but they're also art. It was the first time I thought to myself, there's people behind the camera making all this happen. There's someone setting up the scene and making sure that everything goes according to plan. And that's when I kind of started to become obsessed with film directing, and it's why I'm on the path that I am today. And so I owe a great deal of my movie obsession to Christopher Nolan, and especially for what he does in this film. It's really something special. And then, yeah, there's just so many moments that I love and I would never change in this movie, just because he's so specific about what he wants done. Like, there's not one shot where he went, "Oh yeah, you figure it out." He has everything so meticulously planned out, and that's something I really admire about Nolan and all of his films, but specifically this one hits me the most.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of people are in the same boat as you. This was a really influential movie on a lot of people. And I am curious to see 20, 30 years from now how many people credit this movie like Jaws was credited, like The Godfather was credited, like these sort of classics of cinema was credited by the directors of whatever age we were in.
Mhm.
And to see if this movie is one that really, really inspires some people to become directors and make the next great masterpiece. One last moment I really want to talk about that there's just something so powerful about it to me. It's kind of a two-parter. It's the moment where Alfred is telling Bruce Wayne the story about the thieves. I forget where it was, off in some remote jungle, and how some men just want to watch the world burn. And from that, like the scene with that line, and just how great that scene in general is, not just that line, but that scene where he's talking about just the madness of these thieves and how they just stole all these diamonds because they wanted to, and they were giving them away to little kids because the money didn't really matter to them. And then to see the Joker burn all of his and everyone else's money really sort of hammers that home. And I it's one of those scenes where I love that parallel, and I think Michael Caine as Alfred really is in this movie a lot, but he really makes those scenes so powerful and really adds to the movie with those really small scenes.
Yeah, I agree. Michael Caine absolutely kills it with the very few scenes that he has to really show his chops. That story, actually, by the end of it, and I'm not sure, I can't remember based on my first time watching it, but I know every time since then, at the end of that story, all I can picture is the Joker. I don't picture the scenario that he paints and tells Bruce about. I don't see a jungle. I don't see, was it rubies? I don't see any of that. I just see the Joker burning all that money, and that one thug just looking like, oh my God, what are you doing? And this is one of my favorite, like the look on that guy's face always gets me every time I see this movie. It's so priceless.
Yeah, absolutely. Or even the opening scene with the Joker where we really are introduced to him when he comes in, he
Mm.
shows off his magic trick. And all of these actors, who a lot of them are extras, they don't even have speaking roles, to see sort of their anger at this guy for first barging in. They're really macho. What are you doing here? Like, we're going to show this guy, obviously, we're the best criminals in town, to this fear, because he really,
Yeah.
just like the unbreakable Batman, really gets into their soul and like shows their demons, and this really gets them. And I love that no one can understand him and no one can crack him, and because of that, it makes people scared. And a lot of that came out from the audience too, because they couldn't understand him because the Joker was just such a wild card.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great point that you brought up that the Joker really makes these criminals like scared, just the way Batman does. And I think that really shows the parallel between them, and how Batman does that through fear, but with the goal of justice. And then with the Joker, it's also with fear, but with the goal of gaining control over what he needs to accomplish what his goal at that time is. And I think that's really well done. And in that scene specifically, it is really well communicated.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to take a moment to sort of talk about the Joker's plan in general, whether it is the bank robbery, whether it is getting captured and blowing up the MCU. There's so much stuff. And well, I think one of my small issues with this movie is sort of how ridiculous this whole plan is and how sort of implausible, even for a genius to figure out. Um, it is really entertaining, and there is something about movies being an escape and just seeing everything come together so perfectly for him is really movie magic in a way. And while it may prevent me personally from calling this a perfect movie, there is something really charming about seeing this masterful plan come together. But he plays it
Yeah.
off like it's not a big deal. Do I really look like a man with a plan? And you believe
Mhm.
him. And then you think back on it and you're like, wait, no, you had a plan. This is ridiculous.
Yeah, no, he that's that's an interesting point. For me, while the plan is absolutely ridiculous, like so much of it's like, how are you pulling that off? But I can look past that because despite the fact that this is a very grounded and meant to feel real movie, I still like that there's that aspect of this is still kind of wacky and it's not entirely real. Like there's still that escapism that I get from it. So I think the elements of how crazy his plan is, and the fact that there's a man walking around with uh, half his body burnt to a crisp, that I think really works for me, just because it adds to the veil of watching a movie, and it just takes you out of real life for 2.5 hours, and it really puts you into this world that, while similar to ours, still has its own uh, movie magic kind of quirks.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a comic book. This is based off, I'm not sure if it's based off a singular comic book or multiple, but this is based off of the Batman comics, which it's it's fantasy, and obviously there is sort of a not real element to that. So I think that is an interesting point that you made up, that if for a movie so grounded that's based off of something so not grounded, there's sort of that small element that is grounded. That's super interesting. I want to talk about one more Joker moment that came to mind, because really his performance is incredible. And I think this might have even been the one that really hit me the most. It's at the end, the last time we see the Joker,
Mm.
when he's hanging upside down and he's telling Batman, "I'm having too much fun with you. You're not going to kill me because you can't. And why would I ever kill you, because we're having too much fun here." And this yin and yang thing, that's there's something just so disturbing about this sort of addiction they have to each other, that he really just so perfectly describes in that scene. And it really,
Mhm.
like so much of his performance and so much of this movie, is just haunting.
Yeah, I agree. And at the end of it, well, in that scene, he reveals that he broke Harvey, and Harvey is his ace in the hole. And the really interesting choice that Nolan and Jonathan Nolan made when writing it was that they had the Joker win. At the end of the day, sure, Joker's in custody, but Joker's goal was to tear down the one shining light in Gotham, and brought him down to their level of darkness, and really just breaks everything. And then at the end of the movie, Batman has to he has to give up his hero persona to allow uh, so many criminals to be able to stay in prison because of the things Harvey did. If those got out there, then every good deed that Harvey had done would be undone. So I found that really interesting, that that's the way the Nolan brothers decided to write this. It's really powerful in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's so interesting that he puts that scene right next to the boat scene, which I think, first, a little bit of setup. I think that boat scene in general is just so brilliant, because he quite literally uses the prisoner's dilemma with real prisoners. And if you don't know what the prisoner's dilemma is, it's basically a almost bargaining relationship device that is with two people or two parties. The example that's usually used is there's two prisoners in custody, and they have to sort of put trust in each other to get the best outcome for each other. So, say prisoner A betrays prisoner B. Prisoner B is going to have 3 years in prison, but prisoner A is going to walk free. And if prisoner B betrays prisoner A, it's the same thing. But if they both betray each other, they get 2 years in prison. But if neither of them betray each other, they both get 1 year in prison. So it's this, you have to have trust in the other party to do the right thing. Because if you may do the right thing, or you may do the wrong thing and get the best result for you, but they don't, or you may both do the wrong thing and both get a bad result, or if you guys work together and both do the right thing, you either will be punished or you don't get punished at all. And I think it's so interesting to have these two boats, one filled with prisoners and one filled with civilians, and they have a button to blow each other up. And the one that doesn't the one that blows the other one up can live. And I thought it was so interesting to watch two very different groups, or at least perceived very different groups, really in the end ultimately do the good thing. And at least try to have each other live, despite what the Joker said would happen, in that if they both didn't blow each other, if they, one of them didn't press the button, he would blow both of them up. And I think it's so interesting that right after that, the Joker says, "I broke Gotham's best. I broke the Shining Knight. I broke the White Knight." Whereas in he just Nolan just shows that there's good in humans, even in the
Mhm.
worst of situations. They can't be broken, and some of these are the scum of the earth, these criminals who've committed heinous crimes, but even still, both sides decide that they don't want to be the cause of each other's death. And I think that there's something really powerful about those two scenes contrasting each other and really almost creating a interesting image of humanity.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I had never heard of the Prisoner's Dilemma until you brought that up to me just a little while ago. And reading into it a bit, it's really interesting, and I feel like Nolan really does a great job of representing that here in the movie, and that's one of the most powerful aspects, especially in the third act. And it really it it's one of those things that a lot of movies try to do where they tried to build tension in something that doesn't directly connect with our hero or any of our ancillary characters, and we're supposed to care about it. Like, for example, in the Amazing Spider-Man 2, there's like Spider-Man's fighting Electro, there's Gwen trying to uh, figure out a way to stop him, and then there's uh, a airplane in the sky that's about to hit another airplane, but there's really no stakes, and or there are stakes, but there's no interest in that because you don't feel connected to anything that's happening with those people on the plane. But here in the boat, you get a sense for the genuine fear, and you feel the direct effect that the Joker had in this situation that I think it just plays out so beautifully in the movie. And it's a really great piece to have near the end to contrast what happens with Harvey Dent.
Yeah, absolutely. For a movie already with a lot of mouths to feed and a lot of important characters, and obviously Michael Caine and great actors like Michael Caine and Morgan Freeman not even getting that much screen time in this movie, it's so interesting that Nolan decides to focus a good chunk of the third act on these people who we haven't seen before instead of one of the greatest villains of all time in the Joker. And it does work so well for this movie, and it was really a risk and a gamble that he made because it might not work like the Amazing Spider-Man 2, but in this movie there's something about it that he's able to really capture these people, and really it's great, and it has stakes, and it's a really really powerful moment. um Another thing I want to talk about in this movie, there's a lot of things in this movie that I find interesting that are really sparse, that most comic book movies would have far more of, and that's the action. There's really not a lot of action done in
Mhm.
this movie, but when it is, it's so great. The moment that really stands out to me, and I even wrote it in my notes, when that bus flips, I just wrote, or the truck flips, I just wrote, wow, because this movie
Mhm.
uses so many practical effects, and that's really like the granddaddy of them all. It's just so amazing to see it really happen, and there's just something just like odd dropping about that.
Yeah, I agree, and I find it really special, especially in the age of CGI and digital effects, and they actually flip the truck in real life, which I find that so cool, and that's what I love about something like Mad Max Fury Road. And so when that happens, uh, you never go, "Oh, that looks kind of fake." No, it looks real because it is real, and that to me is really awesome. And you're right, there is a significant lack of action in this movie, but you're still always on the edge of your seat because most of these scenes are always thrilling and just have you just going, what's going to happen next? And so I feel like it was smart to sacrifice the action for these more thrilling moments to better capture the fact that this is essentially just a crime drama. And that's something I really admire about this film, and that makes it stand out to me so much among other movies. Like, I do love Captain America Winter Soldier, and it is a political thriller, but I feel like it didn't sacrifice enough of the action for more thriller aspects and more quieter but intense moments. And that's something that this film does extremely well, that I want more out of comic book movies or just big tentpole films in general.
Absolutely, and I think it's interesting to see a lot of movies, comic book and otherwise, really you can sort of feel yourself waiting for the action because what's going on otherwise isn't that interesting. But this movie's so interesting that when a big action scene happens, you're excited to see it, but you never missed it. You never felt like, oh, this is exactly what I needed. And it really does make the most of the scenes that it has. Obviously, before that, there's the scene where the Joker is trying to get to Harvey Dent. And there's the two cars in the tunnel going up against each other, and that's an incredible action scene. And you have Batman towards the end of the movie going to get to the Joker, and that great twist where all of the hostages are the look like they're Joker's henchmen, and then all the doctors are actually the Joker's henchmen, and that great twist and that great action. And the action really does feel almost like a seasoning on in this movie where it's sprinkled on and you love it when it's there, but it never feels needed and it never feels missed, and you never feel like there was too much or too little of it. And it's great, and it adds to the pacing of the movie. And I feel like the action really adds to the movie. It isn't the movie. And I think that's super refreshing for big tentpole movies in general.
At this point in the video, Ty's mic ended up having some technical issues that would last throughout the rest of the show. So sadly, the sound quality in his mic does take a dip throughout the rest of the show. The rest of our conversation is still great, and I highly encourage you to listen. But sadly, the sound quality is not up to the standards that I would like for this show. I apologize for the inconvenience, but hope that you continue to listen. Thank you.
That's something that I feel like is missing from a lot of tentpole movies and comic book movies in general. I like that they put story first and not action. And the most recent example of a movie doing this, almost as well as The Dark Knight, is Logan. I feel like they did a really good job. And putting the story and characters like Batman before the action, I think, is really key, especially in a Batman movie.
Yeah, absolutely. And to sort of springboard off that, I want to go and talk about Christian Bale's performance as Batman, because I think that there are sort of, at least for me, a few sort of, I guess you could say, weird Batman moments with his deep voice. And I guess there's a couple of those, but really there's a lot of scenes in this movie that really impressed me, especially when he is Bruce Wayne, and seeing Bruce Wayne put on the Bruce Wayne act. In a weird way, it almost very much feels like Robert Downey Jr. from Tropic Thunder, who was also nominated the same year Heath Ledger was for Best Supporting Actor, how he's this actor playing an actor, playing a soldier. And I like seeing that to a lesser degree with Christian Bale playing this Bruce Wayne character that he's created. And obviously there's the great party scene where he gives this really backhanded compliment toast to Harvey Dent, and Rachel gets mad at him, and clearly because he kind of insults him, but then at the end also has this really good moment of sincerity. But the moment that I love the most is this really quiet action from him at the end, or sort of towards the second half of the movie, when the Joker says that if Coleman Reese isn't killed in the next 60 minutes, he's going to blow up a hospital. And there's this car that's going after the truck that he's in. And Bruce Wayne drives into the car and stops Coleman Reese from getting killed. And Gary Oldman's Jim Gordon's talking to him. And he's like, wow, that was really brave what you did. And he acts naive. He's saying, I was just trying to beat the light. And Coleman Reese sees him, the guy who was about to unveil his secret and say to everyone that he's Batman. and he just gives him the slightest little nod, like,
Yeah.
I've got your back. And there's something about that moment that really, really stood out to me, and I think it really sort of encapsulates his performance throughout the trilogy as Bruce Wayne, giving a little nod to him and to the audience as this is an act. And I think that's really what's some of the best part of this, one of the best parts of his performance.
Yeah, I agree. That's a really good and strong moment in this movie. It's so subtle that you might miss it, but it just really shows that, like, hey, even if you're not on my side 100% of the time, I'm there for you and I'm there to help you out. And that was communicated really well with just the subtlest little nod and the look that he gives to Mr. Reese. And yeah, just you bring up a great point. The entire trilogy is really about Bruce Wayne. I know at the forefront you have Batman, but at the end of the day, the way I see this movie and all three of these movies is that they're Bruce Wayne's journey. And Christian Bale does a great job of showing the different layers to Bruce Wayne. His playboy aspect, where he's pretending to be someone he's not just to keep up the persona of there's no way this guy could be Batman. And then, of course, you have his Batman persona where he's really gruff and really intense. But then you have who Bruce Wayne really is, and he's just someone struggling to get back to who he wants to be. And he's trying to hold on to that through Rachel. And then throughout the trilogy, you see him develop in other ways to achieve that in different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think another really important part of his character and a big moment in this Bruce Wayne trilogy is the ending when Harvey Dent dies and Batman says, I'm going to take the fall for this, because he thinks that Harvey Dent's image is more important than the Batman. And there's something really powerful about that, and something that you can almost see as a character earlier on, that he is willing to give it all up, even for someone who has done him wrong. And he's able to put aside that anger and really sort of be the best of us and be the hero that Gotham needs. I think there is something powerful about that ending, and almost how it is foreshadowed earlier on, how you see that Bruce Wayne and Batman is really such a selfless character, and it's such a great way to end this movie, to see once again another selfless act in a movie that's filled with like bad acts and the worst of humanity.
Yeah, it's one of the best endings to any movie I've ever seen. I thought it worked really, really well. Just all around, it worked. It complemented the themes of the movie, and it really gave a nice little added layer to not only Christian Bale's performance, but also Aaron Eckhart's and Gary Oldman's. They all have great moments in that last scene of the movie.
Yeah, and I wanted to talk about Gary Oldman as well, because I think obviously the Joker and Heath Ledger gives an incredible performance and kind of overshadows a lot of the other performances in this movie. And I think Gary Oldman's is really a remarkable one, because oftentimes I can't see Gary Oldman as an actor in that role, even though it's seemingly not a difficult role to pull off. He inhabits this character so well and just makes you feel like you know Jim Gordon, and really lets you see a Jim Gordon. And Gary Oldman's an interesting actor because he, especially younger and at a younger time in his career, would often play these sort of outlandish roles where he had thick accents or he had crazy monologues, or as he showed off such range. And it was really cool to see him play this really understated role and really disguise himself as Jim Gordon. It's really tough for me to watch and to not see anything besides Jim Gordon. And I think that that's really amazing. And he obviously has an incredibly emotional moment with his son at the end of that scene, and that's a great moment as well for him. And really, what caps off a really, really strong performance and a really overlooked performance in this movie.
Yeah, I agree. There's not a single moment in this movie where I go, "Oh, that's Gary Oldman. He's also Sirius Black." No, I only see Jim Gordon, and I feel like that's a really strong aspect of this movie. And I feel like that's something that was missing in the previous incarnation of Batman on film. And like Commissioner Gordon is such a key character to who Batman is. And they really, really got him right in this movie and in the other two films as well. And he's such a key player to everything that happens.
Well, absolutely. I forgot he even played Sirius Black because I just think of Sirius Black as Sirius Black. I don't think of Sirius Black as Gary Oldman, which really I'm starting to realize how great of an actor Gary Oldman is and how overlooked
Yeah.
at least he's been from me, because I need to watch more of his movies because he's a really, really impressive actor. And I think that character is so right, not only because it's written well, but because he gets it so right. And I just remember the first time watching this movie really feeling that really sadness when he dies. And even though it's kind of an anticlimactic moment for good reason because he's not actually dead, it really hits you hard. And I don't think it's because of the writing or how his death was done, but it's because he creates just such a likable character that even as when I saw this movie, I was pretty young, going, I like that guy. And now he's gone, and that makes me sad. But then to see him come back in that triumphant moment when they do capture the Joker, obviously it's not quite what they expected, and it doesn't turn out well for them. But in that moment of success and triumph, to see him back, you feel good again. And he creates such a likable character, and he really inhabits what Commissioner Gordon is to me.
Yeah, me too. And he's exactly like I don't know how big of a comic book fan you are, but if you read any Batman story, that is Commissioner Gordon ripped straight out of the comic books. Not just in the way he acts, not in just the way he talks, but also with the way he looks. Like Gary Oldman has the perfect look for this character. And it's something that I'm kind of worried about with J.K. Simmons because not that J.K. Simmons isn't a great actor, it's just that he's more than Ben Affleck's following up Christian Bale. J.K. Simmons will be following up the amazing performance that Gary Oldman gives as Commissioner Gordon, which I think, like Harvey Dent, is slept on in this movie. But I think in The Dark Knight Rises, people give him a little bit more props because he does have more to do in that movie. But he's just so fantastic here. And you're right, like you care so much about when he dies. Like you're like, oh no, one of my absolute favorite characters that he brings levity and a bit of some light to every situation, and seeing him die like that, not because of the writing, but because of him, it's really powerful and really well done.
Absolutely. It was interesting that you brought up sort of replacing someone in a tough act to follow, because I want to talk about Maggie Gyllenhaal and her performance. Obviously, she was recast when Katie Holmes was in Batman Begins. And I know a lot of people have issues with that performance. I personally do like Katie Holmes in Batman Begins. I think that she's really good. But I think Maggie Gyllenhaal might be better. And while definitely the first time watching this movie, it took me out of the movie when I first saw her because it was a recast, and that was surprising. But obviously, what can you do in that situation besides hire someone who has proven to be a great actress before and after this, but really steps in and adds a new dimension to this role for a movie that adds a new dimension. Batman Begins sort of takes a step up with The Dark Knight. The Dark Knight feels like something's added to it. And I'm not saying that either one's better or worse, but just there's something that feels added with The Dark Knight, and I really feel that with Maggie Gyllenhaal's performance too versus Katie Holmes. How do you feel about Maggie Gyllenhaal versus Katie Holmes as far as their performances?
I feel like Maggie Gyllenhaal is a huge improvement over what Katie Holmes brought to Batman Begins. I look, Katie Holmes doesn't give a bad performance, but she doesn't do anything particularly interesting or special in it. And so I really liked the added layers that Maggie Gyllenhaal brought to it, and she made me care more about Rachel, because Rachel in Batman Begins, well, yes, clearly is an emotional anchor for Bruce. It just doesn't quite feel like her own character, but in this, she feels like her own character in her own right, and I feel like that's a great testament to how good Maggie Gyllenhaal is here.
Yeah, absolutely. One last point on her performance. I think that it's really needed, especially even in that first scene. Harvey Dent is so lighthearted and jokey, and she really keeps him in his place, and she keeps Bruce Wayne in his place, and she really keeps everyone in this place. And I think that might even be what was sort of added to this character, this sort of grittiness almost to her, that it doesn't matter if it's a man, a woman, if they outrank her, or if they're a notorious criminal, she keeps them in their place and really sort of sets them on edge. And I think that there's something really, really cool about that performance. I want to go into, I guess personally with me, a little bit of issues I have with the movie. I know this is your favorite movie of all time.
Yeah.
And just to see what you think about them. They're really small, as I've said before. This is a great movie, and these issues aren't huge ones and really don't make or break the movie. But I think, as we were talking about before, sort of the Joker's ridiculous plan, and for a movie that's so grounded, there are a few moments where I wish that it had felt a little bit more grounded all the way through. I think Two-Face's story, I think to see him go from this super, super light guy, like, who's really peppy and happy and serious, and he's so good, to, I understand Rachel dying is a traumatic experience for him and one that devastates him, but it does feel pretty sudden to me, his sort of arc, and to see, even before she dies, him using the coin, whether or not he's gonna kill people, it felt a little bit too, I don't know the right word, I guess comic booky, which is funny to say for a movie that's based off a comic book.
Yeah.
But just for a movie that was so grounded, it does feel a little bit out of place to me. Another sort of moment was when he's flipping the coin with the mob boss, who, by the way, is played really, really well by Eric Roberts, Sal Maroni. He's this great little slime ball mob boss, and I just really wanted to mention that because he steals a lot of the scenes that he's in. But
he's really good.
The scene where he flips the coin, and then he doesn't shoot him, but he shoots the driver, and they get in a big accident, and then Two-Face comes out unscathed. Like, there's just little loose ends like that bug me a little bit. And just overall, for a movie that is so grounded, I wish that it was grounded all the way through, because it doesn't feel that way in some places, and it takes me out of the movie just a little bit.
Well, that's fair. I certainly couldn't say, no, you're wrong, you misunderstand it. Like, it's just different for everyone, right? Like, certain moments are going to hit you differently. And for me, like, the moment where he shoots the driver, for me, it's like, oh, he put his seatbelt on, so he's going to be fine. This is a comic book movie. Even though it is grounded, I can look past it. And so, I don't know. I can totally understand where your issue is with it. It makes sense. It doesn't bother me at all. And then, as to him turning into Two-Face and like kind of going mad real quick, I feel like there was a lot of subtle things throughout the movie, and some not so subtle, that kind of led to this breaking point for the character. And so when he finally does snap in that confrontation with the Joker, with the gun, it really works well for me overall as an arc for the character. There's so much build up to it throughout the entire movie that I feel like a lot of other movies would have ignored. Like, they would have just had him, oh, he was in an accident and now he's angry and his girlfriend's dead. and it would have felt contrived. But here, it felt natural for me, and it just felt right, and I have no issue with that. But that's the one where I kind of can't see where you're coming from, but that's just me.
Yeah, sure, I totally get that. And obviously, especially with something as subjective as a character arc, I can totally get why it wouldn't bother you. And for the most part, it doesn't bother me, but there are a few moments where I felt like I wish I would have seen a little bit more, but I also understand for a 2.5 hour movie to add a little bit more would have distracted more than it would have added. So I completely get that. Once again, it's really small issues. I still think this is a great movie. There's a lot of really, really great aspects to this movie, and a lot of really revolutionary stuff for a comic book movie. I'm curious, where would you rank this amongst Nolan's filmography? I definitely want to sort of touch upon the other movies that he's made. Spoiler free, because this is a spoiler podcast for The Dark Knight. We'll probably talk about Nolan's other movies another day, and we can spoil that.
Well, this sits right at number one because it's my number one of all time. So that would by default put it at number one for Nolan. But for a while there, I did have Interstellar above The Dark Knight. But I did flip flop, and now I watched The Dark Knight a few times in the past year, and it's definitively a number one. And it's going to be a while until that's dethroned, if ever.
Okay, yeah, very interesting. So obviously Nolan's favorite filmmaker of yours. Can you sort of list down maybe your top 5 of the Nolan movies, or however many you'd like to name off, and just sort of how close off they are to each other and how close they are to The Dark Knight? I know obviously you were saying Interstellar at one point was above The Dark Knight. Sort of what makes
The Dark Knight, Interstellar right below it, and then Inception, which is pretty close. And then I'd probably give it to Batman Begins, then Memento, Insomnia.
And it's all good if you want to finish,
Then,
if you don't, or if you'd like to finish, you can finish them all. But I was just curious about those top ones. Is Nolan your favorite director?
Yeah, I would say he is.
What about him and his direction style and his screenplays, because he writes most of his own screenplays, do you love so much that makes a movie like Interstellar, that makes a movie like The Dark Knight, that makes a movie like Inception great to you?
It's the fact that they're just so emotionally grounded, and not necessarily that they're grounded in realism, just like the emotions, they all feel real. They don't feel contrived. They don't feel like, oh, this is a movie moment, like, oh, the boy has to like the girl. It just feels like it's what people would really do in real life, and people talking the way that they would talk in real life. And that's something that I really love about Nolan. And then the way he directs and frames every single shot, to me, is so special, and I love that about him.
Yeah, definitely, just how meticulous he is. And I think to sort of springboard off of what you were saying, Nolan's a favorite director of mine. I don't have him as high as you do, but I think what really makes his best movies, and even his movies that have flaws, great, is this sort of look and this tone that very much feels unlike anything else. His movies just feel so unique, especially from Batman Begins and on, how he really developed a specific style and just a way that his movies feel that's really great. And I think that's why a lot of people not only were inspired by his movies, but consider him to be an auteur and one of the best, if not the best, director working today. Ty, it's been great having you on. I've loved talking The Dark Knight with you. I love this podcast because it gets me to rewatch something that I've been putting off for a long time. I saw The Dark Knight maybe a year or two after it came out for the last time, and I haven't seen it in years. It was great to revisit this movie. It was great talking with you about this movie. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun, and it's always a good time to talk about The Dark Knight, and I'd love to come on again sometime.
Absolutely. We'd love to have you, or I'd love to have you back on. Is there anything you want to plug, Ty?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Nerdy Casual, and you can find me writing articles about movies, TV shows, and many other things on geeksgamers.com. Check it out.
Great stuff. And as always, you can find me at CWein21, that's CWEIN 21 on Twitter. I promise I'm going to make some socials for this podcast soon. But as for right now, that's the only thing that I have to plug. It's been great having you on. It's been great talking Nolan. It's been great talking The Dark Knight. I hope you had a great time listening to the Everybody Talks Some Movies podcast, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks for listening.